Yes, I'm afraid it's true. Here in England, there is a narcissistic megalomaniac seeking to make everything about himself again. No, I'm not referring to Boris Johnson, I'm talking about Cristiano Ronaldo. I made a video about Ronaldo and why no one seemed to be interested in signing him just a couple of months ago. And since then, the Queen has died, Prince Charles became King Charles III, the UK has had 3 different Prime Ministers, 3 different Chancellors, and it could be 4 by the time you're watching this, who the hell knows at this point, and about 8 different economic crises. And yet, throughout it all, Cristiano Ronaldo has remained in the news. There are those who say that explains all of Ronaldo's actions. He has spent the last 20 years making headlines for all of the right reasons, with the exception of a couple in Der Spiegel, as the star man for 3 of the biggest clubs in world football, scoring goals at an unprecedented rate, and hoovering up all of the awards, accolades, and adulation that one could imagine. Even last season, there were moments when Ronaldo still created headlines for the right reasons, his winner against Villarreal, and that hat-trick against Tottenham most notably, but this season has seen something quite different. Now the stories are not overwhelmingly positive. There are question marks about whether Ronaldo, one of the greatest footballers of all time, is still a net positive to have in a football team, and not even in a great team, but in one that is in transition, and is looking to finish in the top 4 this season. Ronaldo has only scored 2 goals in 12 games this season, he has played fewer than 600 minutes in total, and his last full 90 minutes in the Premier League came in only the 2nd game of this season, which the Red Devils lost 4-0 to Brentford. So there are those who think that Ronaldo is desperate to remain relevant and to make everything about himself, during a period in which Manchester United have actually put together some pretty decent performances and results without him, and maybe there is an element of that, even if only on a subconscious level, that is true. But I don't think that that is really what is going on here. Regrettably, therefore, I've decided to make another video about Cristiano Ronaldo, about why he is throwing such public tantrums, why he needs to leave Manchester United, by hook or by crook, as soon as possible, and why he seems to have turned the brains of several prominent football pundits in England, and especially those who used to play alongside him, into little more than custard. Cristiano Ronaldo has always been selfish when it comes to football, to an almost comical extent. Even his greatest admirers would not dispute that fact. Former teammates talk about Ronaldo being more fixated on winning the individual prizes in football than on collective trophies, and that his body language after his team had just won a game but he had failed to score was akin more to most players after their team had just lost a game. Make no mistake, Ronaldo is not alone in this sense. Lots of footballers are selfish, especially forward players, and sometimes they have to be. This is their job after all, and your colleagues are simultaneously your teammates and indeed your rivals. What's more, Ronaldo was at least quite upfront about his attitude. Whilst other players give stock answers about the team being the most important thing, just wanting to help the team, I'm not focused on myself too much, etc, etc, Ronaldo has made no secret of his desire to win all of the individual accolades, once telling Piers Morgan a few years back, when asked what record he would like to have the best, that he would like to have the most golden balls, referring to the Ballon d'Or, adding that he would love that and that he thinks that he deserves it. However, whilst Ronaldo was always selfish, his selfishness aligned with his own team's interest. To win the Ballon d'Or at Real Madrid, for example, Ronaldo pretty much knew that he would have to win the Champions League, and when he was that good, scoring 50+ goals a season, Los Blancos were extremely grateful that Ronaldo was quite so selfish and so immensely focused on winning, whether that be on his own or, even if only inadvertently, as a team. So Ronaldo seeming to be extremely self-interested, starting before this season had even begun, you may recall, when it was first reported that he wanted to leave Manchester United after a single season because the club failed to qualify for the Champions League, and he wanted to add to his Champions League goal-scoring tally to prevent it from ever being overtaken, not least by Lionel Messi, who is just 13 goals behind him now, and continuing most recently with him reportedly refusing to come on against Tottenham and leaving the stadium before the end of the game, I don't think that any of that should be particularly surprising. What has of course changed is that Ronaldo's interests no longer align with the club that he represents for the first time in probably 20 years. Ronaldo wants to keep scoring goals and breaking records, and to do that, he needs to be playing games and getting minutes under his belt, preferably with others creating lots of chances for him. Whereas Erik ten Hag wants to play fast, dynamic football, pressing from the front at times, and to use Ronaldo, primarily, as a lethal weapon off the bench when his team is in need of a goal. For that reason, this conflict was always inevitable, and that is why, as I said at the time, I found it slightly strange that Manchester United didn't make more of an effort to offload Ronaldo, at least as far as we know, when he first expressed an interest in leaving, when it was rumoured that there was actually some firm interest in him. And I do wonder whether it was commercial considerations coming down from the top, rather than Erik ten Hag's own views, that caused that initial reluctance to let him go. If I was putting my most sympathetic cap on, that is my sympathetic cap there, by the way, it's quite fashionable, in an attempt to justify Ronaldo's behaviour, I would echo a point that Peter Crouch made last weekend, that it must be difficult for Ronaldo to have been the main man in every team that he's played in for at least 15 years, and then to have lost that mantle quite suddenly and to become a rotation option. I totally get that. Though, it is also worth pointing out that that exact scenario has happened to literally every great footballer who has ever lived, except perhaps for someone like Duncan Edwards, who tragically died in the prime of their life. The heights that Ronaldo has scaled means that his come down will be harsher than most, but whether it be Pelé, Diego Maradona or Michel Platini, every footballer is forced to come to terms with the notion of time to change their game, and ultimately to have to stop playing at some stage because their body is no longer capable of doing it. Pelé had already retired for a second and final time when he was Ronaldo's current age, following 3 seasons playing in New York. Diego Maradona too had already retired, having been a completely different player for the previous 7 years, and Michel Platini had been retired for 5 years, he had managed France for 4 years, and he'd taken up a role with UEFA. No one, not even Stanley Matthews, can entirely defy the existence of time. Those of you who have been subscribed to this channel and have been watching my videos for any amount of time will know that I'm wrong about a great many things. But I've always said, including many times on this channel for the last 5 years, that although Ronaldo is good enough and was likely to remain fit enough to play into his 40s, at a decent level and performing a very specific role as a poacher, that I thought that he would struggle mentally to come to terms with the fact that he was no longer one of the best players in the world or routinely the star of the show. I took a fair bit of flack for saying that at the time, when Ronaldo was still the star of almost every show that he appeared in, but I think that it is one of the very few things that I have been proven right about. That's why, over the summer, I thought Ronaldo might end up going to the MLS, which is where I've always thought that he would eventually end up once he was no longer one of the top 10 or 20 players in Europe, where he absolutely would still be a star man, score goals almost every week, and be the centre of attention. Not dissimilar to Zlatan Ibrahimovic at LA Galaxy. I think that would be great for Ronaldo, especially in a big city like LA or New York. He'd get all of the adulation whilst continuing to score goals and break records. It would be great for brand Ronaldo, increasing his relevance and recognition over in the States, just as it was with brand Beckham, and you suspect that he would quite like all of the glitz and glamour of living over there for a few years, mixing with Hollywood A-listers, and having the freedom to live a slightly more normal life where he wouldn't be as recognised or as constantly mobbed by loads of people if he tried to do anything normal with his family, as inevitably would be the case in almost all of Europe. There is also the option of a move to Western Asia, or the Middle East as it's often referred to within the global West, with Ronaldo having a well-documented relationship with at least one Emirati sheikh, and widespread reports over the summer that he was offered a 2-year deal to play in Saudi Arabia, worth more than £200 million, which would have seen him leapfrog Kylian Mbappe as the highest paid footballer on the planet once again. I don't think that there is as much prestige to playing in one of the Gulf states as there is in the MLS, and there would be a lot less interest from the outside world in what he achieved there, as well as it being less beneficial to brand Ronaldo. Though, it is certainly the only place he could go now if he wanted his next contract to be worth more than half his current one. On this point, of Ronaldo's obsession with records, the perception of him, and his legacy within the game, it is partly because of that I don't think that his histrionics recently are a stunt, and why I think that they are just a genuine outpouring of frustration and petulance on his own part. When it comes to Ronaldo's legacy, the single most important thing between now and his retirement is the FIFA World Cup in Qatar in less than a month's time. Ronaldo has won everything in the club game and on an individual level, and most trophies and awards on multiple occasions, as has his great rival Lionel Messi. What both of them lack is ever having won the World Cup, or even having had a genuinely awe-inspiring or era-defining tournament like Pele, Maradona, Cruyff, Beckenbauer, Zidane, Ronaldo Nazario, Romario, and so on in terms of the game's all-time great players. Messi, obviously, won the Golden Ball as the best player in 2014, where he was very impressive. But it wasn't Maradona in '86. Meanwhile, Ronaldo has scored 7 goals in 17 games at 4 separate FIFA World Cup finals. He scored a memorable hat-trick against Spain in the group stage at the most recent World Cup, which you'd have to say was his greatest World Cup moment, but for a player of his calibre and reputation, never to have scored a goal in a World Cup knockout game, and to have averaged fewer than 1 goal every 3 games overall, he is the type of person who will know that is a very rare blotch upon his legacy and record within the game, and that this upcoming World Cup is almost certainly his only chance to put that right. If you gave Ronaldo the option of Portugal winning the World Cup, with him scoring the winner in the final, but it meant that Manchester United would be relegated this season, he would bite your hand off before you had even finished asking him the question. Of that I have absolutely no doubt. This World Cup will have been his obsession for more than 4 years, ever since Uruguay knocked Portugal out of the last World Cup in Russia, and whilst he will start, regardless of his club form, fitness, or any other considerations for Portugal under Fernando Santos, to the chagrin of many Portuguese football fans, but nonetheless that is the case, he would certainly benefit from getting at least some minutes under his belt to keep him sharp and ticking over ahead of that tournament. He has now put all of that at risk due to his own petulance and fracturing his relationship with Erik Ten Hag as a 37-year-old, which would seem to me to be quite foolish and short-sighted on Ronaldo's part. The reality for Ronaldo now, as I discussed at length in that video a couple of months ago about why no one wanted to sign him over the summer, is very simply that his negatives outweigh his positives for elite level teams. And he either doesn't want to play for a non-elite level team, or they simply can't afford to sign him. This was always going to be a problem for Ronaldo, particularly with the way in which the game has changed over the past decade, with such a focus on pressing, athleticism, and defending from the front. Whilst Ronaldo was able to adapt his game so efficiently over the years, better than almost anyone else in the entire history of the sport, from tricky wide man in a 4-man midfield during his early years at Manchester United, to the complete wide forward in a front 3 at both Manchester United and Real Madrid, and eventually a ruthless centre forward who made 90+% of his impact within the 6-yard box, there was nowhere really for Ronaldo to go after that final stage. I loathe to make any comparison between Ronaldo and Messi because we all know how that ends, but it has always been obvious, to me at least, but I would imagine to most people, that Lionel Messi would be able to drop deeper and deeper if he wanted to prolong his career into his late 30s or even into his early 40s, assuming that he was able to stay fit, given his vision, awareness, and weight of pass, and that he could even play as a deep-lying playmaker. That is exactly what Messi has done over the last few years, now aged 35, and his heat maps at PSG very frequently show that he is getting on the ball inside of his own team's half, and he seems fairly relaxed, at least from the outside looking in, about turning provider, scoring fewer goals, and Neymar and Mbappe quite frequently being the stars of the show rather than him. Ronaldo can't do that, in the sense of dropping deeper. He can only move further forward, almost Inzaghi-like in terms of his contribution to a team at this stage, and whilst that is not an insult at all, Filippo Inzaghi was a genius when it came to finding the back of the net, there aren't many teams that still play with a Filippo Inzaghi-style centre-forward these days, and certainly there are none at the very highest level, and there is unlikely to ever be one, who is a regular starter under Erik ten Hag. I would argue that Ten Hag can't even afford to start Ronaldo on a regular basis, even if he wanted to, and even if Ronaldo could guarantee him 20 plus goals in the Premier League this season. Which, to be honest, I don't think that he could. It's worth pointing out at this stage, since we ought not forget it, that Ronaldo is still widely reported to be the highest paid player in the Premier League and one of the highest paid players in the world. Manchester United are paying an extraordinary premium and a quite frankly eye-watering amount of money right now to someone who doesn't play very often and has now apparently decided that he will pick and choose when he wants to play and when he doesn't. That brings us to the unsavoury spectacle of several football pundits in England very publicly soiling themselves on live television recently by either acting or pretending to be terminally stupid, none more notably than Roy Keane. Keane has this reputation as being a no-nonsense pundit who pulls no punches, says exactly what he thinks, and cuts through all the bullshit. I must admit, a few years ago, whilst I always felt like he was a bit of a caricature of his own self, I did quite enjoy Keane's take on some issues, he was quite entertaining, and he did have some interesting insights. But now, for someone renowned for their no-nonsense approach, he doesn't half talk a lot of nonsense. For a start, a couple of weeks back, when him and Jamie Carragher were asked to answer a series of top 3 questions on Sky Sports, Keane picked Ronaldo not just among his 3 greatest players of all time, fair enough, lots of people would do that, but also among his 3 best current players in the Premier League right now, alongside Kevin De Bruyne and Erling Haaland. That means, by omission, Keane thinks that at this moment in time, not a few years ago, that Ronaldo is a better player who he would rather have in his team than Harry Kane. Kane has scored 10 goals in 12 Premier League games this season, in addition to being one of the most creative players in the league. I think it's seriously debatable in the Premier League right now as to whether Ronaldo is a better striker than Alexander Mitrovic or Ivan Toney, but to say that he's better than Kane, as Keane might say, give me a break, man. At every single turn recently, Keane has sung Ronaldo's praises, defended any indiscretions either past or present, and lambasted Erik ten Hag for not starting him in every game. It was a similar story last season, though it has certainly ratcheted up a few notches given Ronaldo's limited involvement and contribution, contrasted with his increased controversy so far this season. These are defences that almost all of these pundits, not least Roy Keane, wouldn't make of virtually anyone else. I mean, can you just imagine, for a few seconds, if Paul Pogba had refused to come off the bench in a game for Manchester United and had instead left the stadium during his team's best performance of the season? Keane would be boasting about how if he was still playing he would have kicked him off the team bus and lamped him one in the face. Gary Neville would be stating that his days at the club were numbered, and Graham Souness would probably have literally left the studio and have been leading an angry mob towards his house carrying torches and pitchforks. I am only half joking. I don't even understand Keane's relentless defences of Ronaldo and his willingness to repeatedly make absurd statements, as though he had been frozen in time in 2014 and thought that it was that version of Ronaldo that Erik ten Hag was leaving out of his starting 11. Keane only played with Ronaldo for a couple of seasons. Keane's last 2 seasons at Old Trafford, that is, and Ronaldo's first 2, before he even became the absolute machine that we saw later on at Manchester United and then at Real Madrid. I tweeted about why Keane kept engaging in this ritual public humiliation, along with the likes of Rio Ferdinand and former Manchester United players to a slightly less obnoxious and undignified extent, and some people suggested that maybe Keane saw an element of his own acrimonious departure from the club and his feeling of betrayal and disrespect from the club's management in Ronaldo's treatment, which, All I'll say is as good as a suggestion as you're likely to find, I think. In the clip that I quote tweeted there, which some of you have probably seen, Keane basically slags off Erik ten Hag, says that Manchester United are only 5th in the league and therefore need Ronaldo, despite them finishing 6th when he regularly started games last season, and angrily shouts down Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, who committed the unforgivable crime of stating the absolute obvious. At one point, when Hasselbank says that Ronaldo doesn't give enough back at the moment in return for his ill-discipline, Keane declares that he scores a goal every 2 games. And when Hasselbank says that he doesn't, Keane barks back, "Do you want me to get the stats?" Well, not to worry, Roy, I have got the stats here, and so far this season, Ronaldo has scored 1 goal in 8 games in the Premier League, and 2 in 12 in all competitions, having scored against Everton and Sheriff Tiraspol. That is either a goal every 8 games in the league or 1 every 6 games in all competitions. It is true that over his entire career at Manchester United, dating all the way back to 2003, Ronaldo has scored a goal every 2.375 games, which is almost a goal every 2 games. But it's also true that Javier Hernandez scored a similar number of goals per game for the club, as did Andy Cole. But I don't think that warrants Erik ten Hag starting either of them in every game now. I always find it odd when multiple managers, who are closer to the situation than anyone else, can see players in training every day, have all of their data and analytics at their fingertips, and are, often provably, quite capable football managers, all reach the same conclusion, yet pundits, who have often had considerably less success in management themselves, are so confident that they are seeing something that all of these managers must be missing. I'm not saying that pundits or even just regular old football fans such as myself, who've never even played the game before at any respectable level, can't make insightful or useful observations that professionals might have missed. Of course they can. It is just the sheer hubris of dismissing the conclusion that multiple people, arguably much better qualified and positioned to make that judgment than you have reached. Mason Mount is an outstanding example of this. Every manager that he has ever played under has absolutely adored him, playing him all the time, and have sung his praises. Yet loads of people on Twitter seem to think that he's rubbish. Lampard, Southgate, Tuchel and Potter all love him, but obviously they're missing something, because someone on Twitter says that they don't think he scores enough goals. With Ronaldo, it was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who actually played alongside Ronaldo for 2 years longer than Keane did, who first dropped him in certain games, got blasted for it by some pundits, then Ralf Rangnick did the same thing and also got battered for it, and now it is happening with Erik ten Hag. The difference is that ten Hag has a bit of presence about him, he's ground out some decent recent results, and it is pretty evident to anyone watching Manchester United that they are improving and have improved since he stopped starting Ronaldo, which makes the whole shtick about how foolish he is for leaving him out look rather daft and transparent. Anyway, that's just what I think about Ronaldo's inevitable psychological battle with no longer being the main man, what he should do next, and English football's strange and masochistic pundits who clearly derive extraordinary pleasure from being publicly humiliated and who don't need anyone else to do the humiliating for them. I would love to know what all of you think down below in the comments though, so feel free to let me know. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, I hope that was the case, and feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.